Southern Gothic is a podcast that explores the history behind some of the American South's darkest days, greatest mysteries, and most chilling ghost stories. On our most recent episode, we went on down to Alabama to honor the men whose lives were lost in the explosion at the Banner coal mine. And as we discussed, these men, they weren't everyday coal miners who risked their lives for a paycheck. Most were convicts leased to the Pratt Consolidated Coal Company by the state. Unfortunately, this was not an isolated instance by any means, and this exploitative and corrupt system of convict leasing ran rampant until World War II. Now, while Alabama was one of the biggest offenders and also the last state to abolish the practice, other states followed their own trajectories, and here in Tennessee, convict leasing was outlawed as early as 1894. But y'all look, they didn't do it out of the goodness of their heart. Rather, it was the result of a violent uprising of free miners known as the Coal Creek War. Following the Civil War, shrewd businessmen purchased hundreds of acres of land out in East Tennessee to gain control of the deep veins of coal and iron ore in the mountains and Cumberland Plateau. At first, hundreds of local folks were hired on as miners, which made an incredible impact on these once isolated communities by offering steady jobs with regular pay. But as we know, mining coal ain't exactly the safest or most lucrative gig. Aside from the dangerous working conditions and the long hours, miners were often paid extremely low wages, and in many cases, they were paid in what was called company scrip instead of cash. These were tokens that could only be used at company-owned stores, which often inflated prices. As a result, men became trapped in a cycle of debt that they could never work their way out of. So strikes were common at coal mines all across the nation, not just the South. But what was different here was the way the companies dealt with the striking and unionizing workers. They just shut down the mines and reopened with leased convict labor. Well, in July of 1891, miners in the Coal Creek Valley, the most lucrative mining region in the state of Tennessee, decided enough was enough. On the night of July 14th, 300 men, armed to the teeth, descended upon the stockade in Briceville, where the convicts who had replaced them several weeks before were housed. Completely outnumbered and undoubtedly outgunned, the guards didn't put up a fight, and they surrendered the convicts to the men, who then marched them out to the train station and sent them all back east to Knoxville in a brazen display of defiance against the coal companies. They then sent a telegram to Governor Buchanan asking for him to intervene on their behalf, which they believed he would since he ran on a pro-labor campaign. But to their surprise, the governor's response to the situation was not on their behalf. On July 16th, he personally joined several companies of the state militia and escorted the convicts back to Briceville for the mines to be reopened. There, he asked for the free miners to bear with him and remain peaceful, that he really was a champion of their movement, but it was his job to enforce the law as it was written.
Why, I could do nothing else. If I had the power to change the law, why, then I could have done something in Briceville, but as it was, I did what I considered my duty. I must see the law as carried out, and that is just what I did.
The governor left the following day, but 107 militiamen remained with the convicts at the Briceville stockade, commanded by Colonel Granville Sevier. But y'all, those 107 men weren't going to be doing too much because after Buchanan's response, miners from as far away as Kentucky came down to the Coal Creek Valley to take part in what was next. On July 20th, armed miners again descended on the Bryceville stockade, but this time it's estimated that there were about 2,000 men in their ranks. Sevier had no choice but to surrender, which he willingly did as long as they promised not to destroy company property. So once again, convicts were sent back to Knoxville on a train, but this time, those 2,000 men did not stop in Bryceville. They continued their march out to Coal Creek and did the same at the stockade there. Now, the governor's hand was forced, and so he struck a deal with the miners, promising to hold a special session of the state legislature to put an end to convict leasing, as long as they would agree to a 60-day truce and allow the mining operations to continue uninterrupted. And so they did just that. But in the end, things did not go as they hoped back in Nashville. Rather than abolishing the state's convict leasing system, the state legislature did the opposite. They passed a law explicitly targeting miners who interfered with it, giving the governor the power to take any action necessary to protect the system as it was. Well, you can probably tell what happened next. The miners declared an all-out war. On October 31st, they once again seized the stockades at Bryceville and Coal Creek, but now it was not peaceful. Company buildings were destroyed and looted, fires set, and over 300 convicts were released. But the miners didn't send them back to Knoxville like they had before. They let those convicts go entirely, even supplying the men with food and clothes so that they could integrate back into society. Then, 2 days later, another 153 convicts were freed from the stockade at Oliver Springs, which was also burned to the ground. By now, folks from all over Appalachia were coming down to join with the miners, and on January 1st, 1892, when Governor Buchanan returns convicts to Coal Creek, he does it with an occupying army of militiamen commanded by J. Keller Anderson. These men then built a fort on what would become known as Militia Hill, overlooking Coal Creek, and they outfitted the aptly named Fort Anderson with a Gatling gun, an intense, rapid-firing early machine gun. Then, over the next few months, the situation ebbed and flowed with periods of peace and violence, but by August, the insurrection spread west and escalated once again when a group of men raided and destroyed a Tracy City stockade. Inspired by the successful militia, another group attacked the Inman stockade several days later, forcing coke ovens and mines to be shut down all over the state. Back at Oliver Springs, though, a shootout took place, and for once the militia held their ground, but it wasn't for long. In less than 24 hours, 1,500 miners returned to Oliver Springs, and on August 18, 1892, the militia captain was taken hostage. Yet still, the Cold Creek War continued on. Eventually, after almost 2 years of fighting, both the Tennessee state government and the mining companies had just had enough. After all, the state's profits from leasing out these prisoners had been entirely erased by the cost of keeping the militia there to protect them. So the state legislature went ahead and allowed the convict lease contracts to expire, and on January 1st, 1894, the convict leasing system came to an end in the state of Tennessee. What's interesting here, though, is that this didn't happen in response to the horrific conditions of mines or ethical considerations and civil rights issues regarding the exploitative nature of the system. Rather, here in Tennessee, it ended because the system was just no longer lucrative. Years later, in 1896, the Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary opened its doors to house the convicts who were once leased to the mines. But this facility wasn't just a jail. It was also a coal mine for the state. You see, Tennessee might have abolished leasing out prisoners, but that didn't mean they couldn't profit off convict labor done for the state itself. And of course, y'all, today, Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary is considered one of Tennessee's most haunted locations. But we'll probably get into that another time. My name is Brandon Scheck-Snyder, and you are listening to Southern Gothic.
Lucky Little Shacks.